And what's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of the Designated Players and MLS podcast. We are on round 3 of 29 of our not so deep dives, this time with Chris from St. Louis Soccer News to talk St. Louis City SC into their second season after what is maybe one of the best expansion seasons of all time, bar 1998 Chicago. And now we're going into year 2, ready to dive into it. Chris, how you doing? Thanks so much for being here.
Good, thank you. I appreciate the offer and asking to come and talk with you guys and talk City, which I love to do, and just talk soccer with you guys. I'm a fan of the podcast, obviously, so it's great to have a chance to sit down and talk to you guys today.
Yeah, we're really excited to have some more insight from the last year that we've had. Watching from a distance is fun, but to have the inside and the real nitty gritty of it is going to be really nice. I'm also here with Connor. Connor, how you doing?
I'm doing great.
Good,
Excited to
good.
talk St. Louis soccer.
Yeah. Well, I'm the odd guy out here, it seems. As we do before every episode, we hit a scarf of the week, and it seems like two of the three are on theme and one's a stretch. So, Chris, what are you rocking today? What do you got?
So this is a scarf that was done by one of the supporters groups here in St. Louis. So probably the most well-known supporters group is probably the St. Louligans, of which I'm a very proud member. Has been around for a very long time and done a lot of great charity work, raised hundreds of thousands of dollars over the last since 2010. So I mean, amazing in the community. But this was actually a scarf done by STL Santos, and Santos is the Hispanic supporters group. And outside the city of St. Louis, I don't think a lot of people know that we have a fairly large Hispanic community, and obviously very passionate soccer fans. And so they actually turned this into one of our tifos this year. It's a Somos Passion, which is we are passion and showing passion for the game. Santos has basically started in the beginning of last year and has grown to become a very integral piece of the supporter culture here in St. Louis. They have one of the two supporters block parties before every match, which is a block away from where the Luligan one is. The march into the stadium for the supporters groups actually starts at their block party, at Santos's block party. They have a guy who basically has become an unofficial mascot for the team, Super Santo, who dresses in a full luchador costume for every match and goes out in the community and any type of city event or city match, he's there and he's in costume. And so Santos has really been a big part of the development of the culture of the team over the past year. And so I just wanted to give them a shout and show the very cool scarf that they did for this year. They've done other merch. They did a thing for Day of the Dead. And they did all kinds of stuff that has really been cool for to see and contribute. And obviously they did pay tribute to Super Santo by having the luchador on the backside. So it's just part of a culture here in St. Louis of soccer that is more than just one group of people or one community or one culture. We have a large Bosnian population, Eastern European population in St. Louis, also very, very passionate. So it's good to make sure everybody understands it's not just one type of person that's a fan here. So
I love everything about that. That's scarves. Scarves are my favorite thing, pretty much ever. But
What gave it away?
that is
The giant scarf wall behind you.
but that is like and there that's the reason for it, right? Because it's not just something you wear around your neck. It's got meaning, it's got stories behind it, it's got all of this built into just one piece of fabric, and it's so much more than just a scarf. It's a story, right? And that's
Yeah.
such a wonderful scarf. Love that very, very much. Connor, I'll send it over to you. uh go ahead and show it off.
Yeah. So I'm glad you kind of segued that with all the story talk because um while I'm not the biggest fan of the design of the scarf. I think it's kind of a pretty normal looking St. Louis scarf. Nothing, it's certainly nothing as cool as the one you just showed. But it was like 2 years ago. I was in St. Louis for a business trip, and we went. Me and a couple coworkers. We went over to Union Station to get some food
Mhm.
for lunch, and didn't even click to me that that City Park was right there. So when we drove by, I was like, "Oh, City Park's right there! Like that's the new like St. Louis expansion team." I'm like, "This is my shot. I got to go over and at least check it out." And so luckily that day there was a lot of stuff going on because I want to say it was maybe like it was one of the first ever games there. I want to say it might have been a friendly against like Freiburg or something like that. I can't remember exactly.
Bayer Leverkusen, probably.
Yeah, I think
Yeah,
that's it.
yeah,
Yeah,
that was the
so
actual very first game they ever played there. Yeah.
so we were there the day of. I didn't go to the game because I didn't realize it was going on, but we were there during the daytime. They were doing a bunch of stuff outside, and I was like, "This is a great chance for me to get a scarf to add to the collection." So this was the first ever scarf I got in person at a stadium. I wish I could have got to see a game while I was there, but
Hmm.
at least now, like even though I'm not in love with the design of it, the scarf definitely has like more meaning than a lot of other scarves for me. It's got a story behind it, like you said. So
That's very cool. Yeah, the scarf game has been elevated since the test game. Trust me. Not only do most of the supporters groups at this point have at least one that they've released, the Hooligans have a one every year, but the team itself has some really nice designs, and their kind of creative department does really nice work. And so yeah, so next time you're in town, we'll make sure that we hook you up with a next level one. So for sure.
yeah, definitely.
It's become your graphic too for all of our predictions and stuff too. You got a shot of it outside the stadium, holding it up nice and big. So
Yeah,
that is
they had like photographers and stuff out there, and someone asked to take some pictures, and I was checking because I was like, oh, maybe this is like a team photographer or something, but I never found where they are. So my picture might be out there somewhere on the internet with me holding up a scarf.
Very cool.
Yeah, mine is a stretch. I don't have St. Louis yet. I've got a lot of other ones, but no St. Louis yet. But as the resident Red Bull fan in the room, the links are obviously there between Tim Parker, Bradley,
Yep.
Jared Stroud before he left. So I've broken out just one of my Red Bull ones. It's not the worst one. I like it's kind of simple. It's got this little like you can't really see it on the camera, but it's kind of like a pixelated sort of kind of like 64-bit logo on there.
Gotcha.
Uh,
Yeah.
so so I liked it. I thought it was cool. Picked it up, and
Very cool.
not as cool as yours or Connor's. Maybe a little bit. Mine always is cool like Connor, but that's all right. Let's jump into St. Louis then. Heading into their second season with Bradley Carnell at the helm, after one of the greatest first seasons, as we mentioned, in startup history, in expansion team history, looking to build upon it. As we mentioned, they're first in the West, fourth overall, 56 points, 17 wins, 12 losses, 5 draws. They did lose in round one of the playoffs, but a way better base and a way better starting point than any team overall. Again, since '98 from their first year. So, what are the vibes going into year two like for the St. Louis group?
Yeah, it's very much it's all good vibes so far. I mean, obviously that was a dream first season. Nobody here from the fan base, I think even the club, could have ever expected it to go like it did, to go that well, to have that level of immediate success on the pitch. Everybody assumed that, hey, we're a passionate soccer town, and a lot's been said and written about, and everybody kind of knows that. And um, so everybody knew, like, hey, every game's going to sell out. It's going to be, it's going to be nuts. It's going to be crazy. But okay, they're probably not going to be that great. And the expectations early on last year were, if we could fight to get a playoff spot, 7, 8, 9 in the West, man, that'd be awesome. Wouldn't that be amazing? And then the first 5 games happen, and they go 5-0, and all of a sudden it's like expectations just change completely, and now they shift into, okay, well, we should make the playoffs. We've shown we're a solid club. And as time went on during the season, and you didn't have teams like LAFC or Seattle blowing by them and really, leaving them in the dust, City never fell below fourth in the conference at any point last year at all. And it was 1 week of being fourth, and then they were right back up again. And so the longer that went, it certainly was, expectations started to shift to, like, maybe we can get a home playoff series and a top 4 seed. And then all of a sudden it turned into, hey, we just won the West. And so, obviously the season did not end as we would have liked it, with a deep playoff run. And so, this year's expectations, I think I don't think there's a lot of people who would, legitimately expect them to, oh yeah, we're going to win the West again, and it's going to be, we're going to do exactly the same things, and because anybody who's paid attention to the player movement in the West knows that a lot of teams have tried to go out and improve themselves. And so certainly it's positive, but also saying, hey, let's see what the team is like with the additions that they've made, and the players that they've lost, which I'm sure we'll talk about as we go on here today. But also just a general sense of, okay, this is year two, and they've been through the fire now of year one. The players and the club have probably gotten a better sense of what it takes to compete in a full MLS season. And then what have they learned and how are they going to apply that? And so we also have an additional competition this year, cities in Champions Cup. And so that's another thing that they have to kind of factor in is making sure that they have enough left in the tank towards the end of the year, because last year they frankly they didn't. And so they kind of ran themselves into the ground towards the later stages of last year. So yeah, so the vibes are good. The expectations are that they're going to be a very solid competitive team that's going to be competing again for one of the top spots in the West.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of par for the course about even I won't say casuals, the neutrals. The neutrals are kind of thinking the same thing, where it's like they started off, and we actually talked about this last season when they first came in. We did a whole St. Louis kind of preview, and the one thing that we both agreed on, Connor and I, was they've built their roster different than any other expansion team ever. You had we're going to go old vets of MLS with a couple of Europeans in there. We're going to go with super young South Americans with a couple of MLS vets. They went in and built it with pretty informed European players from different areas of the world, surrounded it with a little bit of MLS experience in the right areas, and then supported it with the youth movement. It was like, we both have, we don't know how it's going to work, but it's different, and it's going to be either really good or really bad, and it ended up being really, really good.
It did.
And that's really impressive.
And if you think about the fact that when they signed Roman Burki, what the immediate reaction of MLS fan base, MLS media, pundits was, why are you paying all this money for a goalie? You don't do that. Like, you don't make your big signing a goalie. Why? And then it worked out, obviously. He was goalkeeper of the year last year. He is the team captain. He is one of the faces of the franchise. And I think now other teams have realized, oh, wait a minute, like maybe that was a good deal, or a good signing and a good idea. And so you're seeing things like Hugo Lloris going to LA. And so I think every sports league, whether it's MLS, NHL, MLB, they're all copycat leagues. And so when somebody has success, another team's going to analyze it and say, okay, how can we take that and apply it to what we're doing? And so yes, the way that they constructed this club and are continuing to do that is all credit to Lutz Pfannenstiel, who's the sporting director, and obviously Bradley Carnell. Those two guys are on the same page, and you can definitely tell that they're both working and kind of pushing in the same direction as far as the player development and player acquisition, for sure. And so the roster construction is very interesting, because no, they did not go out and spend a ton of money on older DPs that may have been flashy or big name signings. And I think partially because they're smart enough to understand from a business perspective, they're going to sell out every game last year anyways. They're going to sell out every game this year. They're going to probably sell out every game next year. St. Louis is a crazy soccer town. And so they don't have to get big names to sell tickets. What they want is success on the field. And especially when you talk about playing the style that they play, which is that high pressing, aggressive style, that doesn't really necessarily, jive with a 30-something guy from Europe who might be on his last legs coming over, and he's a big name. Is he going to be able to run all summer in the St. Louis heat and humidity? Probably not. And so they're going out and getting younger players, guys who can run, guys who are fits for the system, and it kind of doesn't matter what their background is. So.
For sure. Well, look, we could just probably piggyback right off that. We can go right into these signings and the way that they're building their team. They have done a little bit of work to bring this team to another level. Who, in your opinion, is the best addition they've made so far?
So the three that they've brought in this year so far is Nicholas Dyer, Thomas Totland, and Chris Durkin. That's the three that they've essentially added. Totland and Dyer, this will be an odd kind of statement. They're probably going to be starters. There's probably your starting left back and right back. The biggest impact to me is the guy who may not be the starter, which is Chris Durkin. And the reason why Chris Durkin is so important, and Lutz Van Steel again went out and immediately addressed this with this move in the offseason to trade Lucas Bartlett and Jared Stroud to DC to get Durkin, is because the one thing that this team did not have last year, it was an answer for what do we do when Jabula Blom is not playing. Jabula Blom, who's the South African national, was our primary six during the season. And Blom played very well at times. And when he's really good, and I've said it before on other pods, when he's really good, he's really good. And he's an excellent defensive player. However, he had a challenging first year. He was one of the latest guys to get to camp. He didn't have much of a run with them in the beginning part of the season. He struggled. He had COVID. He got hurt. He was away with the South African national team. He struggled in the extreme cold and also in the extreme heat, which, South Africa is a moderate climate down there. So St. Louis is most definitely not in the summers. It's a horrible humidity and heat. And then we also have, bad, winters and cold weather. So, and so when Blom wasn't available or was out with injury or away on national team duty, they didn't really have an answer for who to play there. They tried various things. They tried to put Indiana Vasilev there for a little bit early in the season. Not exactly his ideal position. He's more of a attacking mid than he is a defensive position. And they also had, they would try to play like an Edward Leuven there, who is comfortable playing it, but they really need him to be more of a ball distributor, field general, kind of box to box type guy than the classic role that Blom would play, which is a defensive stopper. And so to get a guy in Durkin who is not a clone of Blom at all, but can provide and can play that six and let Leuven have a little bit more freedom. So either play alongside Blom and double pivot, or be a 1A, 1B with him. And in fact, City's actually playing their first preseason game today on the day we're recording this. And about 20 minutes before we started, Durkin lasered in a goal from about 25 yards out. And I could sense the entire city going, oh, okay, yeah, this is one of the reasons we got this guy, is because not only can he play solid defensively, but he also is going to be a little bit more versatile on the offensive end. Blom is more of a pure classic defensive stopper. Also, the other thing, too, about Blom, not to kind of focus on him too much, but and I've said this before, he's a guy that plays very physically and a very, physical style and demanding on his body, but he's 5'8", 150. So when you do that as a little guy, it wears you down, especially when you're talking about heat and humidity. So hopefully Blom's a little more acclimated to everything this year now that he's had a full season in MLS. But I think really the biggest acquisition of the three is Durkin, because of the flexibility it's going to provide. And they're not going to be scrambling and pushing too many people out of positions if Blom's not available. So, and Durkin is going to push him to start, and which is great. You want competition at every position. And to have a guy where you're like, okay, we're comfortable. You plug Durkin in there, you plug Blom in there. I think either one of them are a good option, and that is just adds to the depth that they have on the roster. So Durkin to me is the biggest signing that they've had.
Yeah, I've always been a fan of Chris. I think he provides a lot in areas like that where he can link both sides of the play. Right, he can link that defensive end. He can be the destroyer if you need him to, or he can pick up the ball, carry, and then distribute. Right, he's got a lot of qualities like that. Connor, your thoughts on their best addition?
So I think Durkin's definitely a really good addition. I mean, considering how many competitions MLS teams have to play in nowadays, I don't think there's such a thing as too much depth anymore. So definitely good to get depth wherever you can. I went with Nicholas Dyer. When doing a bit of research on him, looks like when he was 18, he was getting about 1,200 minutes for a title-winning Midtjylland side. So that to me screams that there's massive potential there. And while I think he hasn't hit that in the last few seasons, I think he's been struggling for minutes. I think the opportunity is definitely there. And I know you kind of touched on it a little bit before, but if he can get those consistent starting minutes, which he hasn't had in the recent years, I think that could be a big boost for him to maybe get back to that level that was expected of him when he was 18. I also think that, and this was kind of what swayed me to go with Dyer as opposed to the others, is on the roster. I didn't, when looking at it, I think the only other left back, at least from transfer markets perspective, that they had listed was Anthony Markinich.
Yeah,
And
Anthony,
what,
Anthony Marganic. Yep.
yeah, I think he's got good potential, but I'm not sure if he was necessarily ready to step in and be the consistent starter at this point. So I think bringing in Dyer is good to at least give options there, even if he does even if he doesn't end up getting the starting job. I think it's at least good to, like I said before, have the depth considering all the competitions to play in.
For sure. Marcanic was brought in from Colorado midseason last year. The left and the right wing back positions for City were very much a kind of musical chairs last year. What you wound up with was a converted center back getting forced into playing a lot of left back, which is Kyle Hebert. Had never played left back before and played a lot of left back last year. And it was clear that that's not a natural position for him. He's a center back and he was asked to do it and did his best and played as well as he could. But Marcanic was a guy that they brought in and I think was thrust into, hey, we don't really have a better option. You need to step up and start, and you need to play more. I think initially they probably brought him in as more of a developmental piece and saying, hey, this guy might be something, in a year or 2 years down the road. And I think he got thrust into playing probably more than what they expected him when they got him. On the right side, you wound up essentially having Akil Watts, play a lot, who's more of a midfield type. He's not really a natural right back. And so to go out and get a Dyer and go out and get Thomas Totland are big because, like I said, that's probably your starters back. And if both of those guys can provide the stability and the style of play that I think younger guys who can run, which is what they want to be able to press push the ball and press. I think obviously you picking Dyers, it makes a lot of sense because, yes, when you look at their roster and you say, okay, do they have true left backs? Yes, they only had Marcanic, and now they have both of those guys. And again, with all the competitions they have to play in this year, you're going to need depth everywhere. And so having those guys is definitely going to be an advantage. So for sure.
And that actually builds right into mine because I picked the third one. I'm really
Totland, yeah.
Yep, I'm really big on Totland. I think he comes in with really good experience at a good age, right? 24 years old. He's won a title over with I believe it's Hacken is how you pronounce that. And he played most of the minutes there. So it wasn't like he was watching his team win it. He was on there experiencing how to be a successful winner, which is always nice to have in a group. You mentioned depth and rotation. Right back is always a spot where you're carrying lots of miles, lots of energy and lots of commitment into both sides of the game. So very, very interested to see how he fits in. But I think he comes in with a lot less risk than other players could have in that spot. So he's one of my best additions there because, like you mentioned, on Dyer and Totland, they're both going to end up being starters. And you were talking about how you had to kind of jerry rig center backs or players who weren't ready into spaces. Now you've got guys who have experience there, who know how to play the position. And by the way, you finished in first in your conference with players out of position. Now you've got a step higher, right? So it's just a great start overall.
Yeah, if you look at their depth on the wingback positions now, and you say, okay, on the left side we have Dyer and Marcanic, and on the right side we have Totland and Jake Nowinski, I'm perfectly fine with that. Those guys are all capable of playing, a lot of MLS minutes. Nowinski played pretty well last year. Not a lot of issues with his play. But I think for the style they want to play, they needed a little more speed out there. I think Totland's speed is going to surprise people. He is much faster to watch play than what I think the initial impression of him was from, clips in Europe and things like that. Watching him, even today in the preseason match, he's a fast guy, and it's going to be nice to be able to have him utilize that speed, and his ability to make transition passes, and then also carry the ball deep, and obviously have defensive responsibility. So I think if they go into the season, assuming everyone's healthy and that's their four wingbacks, I think they're in a pretty good spot.
100%. They also did have a couple people move on, whether it be through trades or through sales. In your opinion, the biggest loss that they are going to feel come 2024, who's not here?
Well, up until about 2 weeks ago, that would have been Jared Stroud. Just because Stroud was gone, along with Luke Bartlett to DC in the Durkin trade, I mentioned earlier. But about 2 weeks ago, that all changed when Nico Gioacchini was transferred to Como and Serie B. Nico was a guy that essentially City got for nothing. They got him in the expansion draft from Orlando. He was a horrible fit in Orlando. I just don't think they knew what to do with him. I think it was just never going to work there, to the point where they left him exposed, and City grabbed him as quickly as they could in the expansion draft. And, it was a home run. He had a tremendous season for City. Really what he did on top of the 10 goals that he scored was he helped stabilize their offensive attack when João Klaus went down with his injury. Klaus was out for a majority of the season last year, unfortunately, with an injury. And it took about 2 or 3 matches after he got hurt for them to try to figure out, they finally kind of figured out, okay, here's how we can still score and be productive without Klaus there, because he's the focal point of the offense. And Gioacchini had a huge role in that. And he had, obviously the 10 goals are important, just from a statistical standpoint, but his ability to play alongside Klaus was really great early. And then, his ability to kind of help carry the offense. And this was before Sam Adeniran had come back from loan, because if you remember, Adeniran went out on loan early in the year. And so he was gone. So there wasn't another real option up top. They tried a few guys along with Nico or play him solo up top. And he was the one who basically, was able to be productive enough to carry them through those matches until then Sam Adeniran came back from loan. And then they kind of carried on from there. So Nico was definitely the most impactful guy as far as on the field production. He had also, just from a fan perspective, had maybe more than any other City player had embraced being part of St. Louis. He had talked about buying a house here. He talked about how much it felt like home here. He was at charity events all the time. He stayed here basically all off season. Most guys went back home and went back overseas or wherever they're from. He stayed here. He was at events. He was at Blues games. He was very visible in the city. And he was really trying to be part of the community here. And so he'll be forever remembered, not only for on field, but off field. The whole team will be, obviously, for that magical first season, and all those guys will forever be part of, the City lore and part of the club. But him especially, just from not only on the field, but off the field, everything he did. And so it was one of those where it's a happy, sad moment where you're sad to see him go, but you're also thrilled because it's an opportunity for him to potentially be playing in Serie A next year. Como's in a position of right now where they're top 2 or 3, I think, in Serie B. They're in a promotion position. And so, to have one of our guys who we took for nothing and got for nothing to now turn around to the rest of the league and say, hey, this is a destination that you can come here as a young player and then move on and advance your career and go to Europe, I think is helpful for the team and the club, and demonstrates that what they're doing is working. So, but yeah, just purely on the field, it's Gioacchini.
Yeah, I don't know if many people can disagree with that, but I'll throw it over to Connor to see if he's got any other ideas.
I am not one of those people that will disagree with that. I have also gone for Nico. Yeah, I mean, he, as you kind of mentioned, he came into his first season with St. Louis off a pretty rough spell with Orlando, and also a couple of rough seasons in Europe, not getting too many minutes. And I think he's been the latest benefactor of the MLS revival, kind of in that same group with like Matt Miazga, those kind of guys that went overseas, took their shot, didn't really work out, came back over to MLS, were able to revive themselves, and now he's got another shot in Europe, and I think that's great for him. As you mentioned, last season really stepped up when Klaus was down. He had 10 goals for the team last year. I feel like every time I was hearing something about St. Louis, Gio was in and around the mix, making things happen. And I think that was probably a huge help to the team, especially when you see one of the guys on your team that's supposed to be this big time great striker who was actually putting up great numbers to start. And now he goes down. Like, Gio stepped up, made sure that the team didn't slip at all, and I think was a huge reason why they were top of the West last season. I think his impact is definitely going to be sorely missed this upcoming year.
It was certainly a perfect kind of confluence of events for him personally. Because honestly, I think with the resurgence and how well Adeniran played, I don't think, assuming everybody stayed healthy, which obviously, nobody ever does, but, let's say all are healthy, he was not going to get as many minutes this year as he did last year, obviously, because he was going to share time with, Klaus is going to play anytime that, that he's healthy and available. But I think you're going to see Nico less than you did last year because of Adeniran's, solid play last year, who was very good for them. And so I think had this happened a year later, maybe he doesn't have that kind of showcase of what he's doing and what he can do because he may not have got as many minutes this year in City. So I think it just worked perfectly for him personally that he was able to get those minutes, show that, he can be a productive striker, and put his name out there and have a team, which it makes logical sense. He spent a lot of his childhood in Italy. He has an Italian passport. So, there's a lot of reasons why it made sense for him to go there specifically. Also Como, I don't know if you've seen pictures of it, but Lake Como is one of the most beautiful places in Italy to live. And everybody, City fans are still following him on Instagram. And we watch, games, they stream all their games for free, which is great. It's not a bad place to be, trust me. And so yeah, I think it was just a perfect opportunity for him. And you did see or get a sense of how, conflicted he was. Like, yeah, this is the best thing for me in my career, but how much he had grown to love being part of City and St. Louis itself. And the team actually put out a video clip yesterday or a couple days ago of him addressing the team as he was leaving training camp. And I mean, he's in tears talking about how much this has been the best year of his life, and both personally and professionally. And so that's the kind of stuff that, St. Louis is very protective of our players in all sports. And if you form a bond with the team and with the city, especially, then you're one of us forever. And he will always be that.
That's awesome. When players can connect to the city and be a part of the club and be also a part of the community, it's just that other level of respect, right? Because of what you said about how he was going to have a little bit less time last year or this year compared to last, and also just to mix things up a little bit, I got to give my homer pick here to Jared Stroud, as you mentioned. He was a good piece for you guys, right? He was custom built for this Carnell pressing system. He came straight up through the Red Bull way. He was also fifth in goals for you guys behind Leuven and then the three strikers. But I feel like with the 2,000 minutes that he gave you and the way that he fit into the system, that other striker or other wide players may not get to that point. And we'll talk about that when we talk about some players to watch in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
But he did fit so well. And I'm just curious to see if other players will fit that as well. That being said, I don't think you feel that as much as not having a successful striker too, right? But I think the feeling will also be
There was a couple things. So Stroud was probably by far the most controversial player here in town, among the fan base. He was very much, half the people loved him and the other half were not Stroud fans. And I think he gets a lot of respect from a lot of people for the style that he plays. He's a very in your face, aggressive. To me, he's almost like a hockey pest, a guy who's going to get in the other team's head and agitate, an agitator type. Um, Stroud was also very much, especially having watched him last year, a guy who you take the good with the bad. He would make a fantastic pass or a defensive stop or a beautiful cross. and then 2 minutes later pass it into nothingness or have a terrible giveaway, or it was very inconsistent with him. And I think his over aggression sometimes, um, he's a yellow card magnet. I think referees know who he is and do not put up with kind of the stuff that he does that other people might be able to get away with a little bit more freely. I also think that Stroud was thrust into playing more than what they probably would have expected him to, mostly probably because Rasmus Alm was hurt. And while they play on different sides of the pitch, I think Alm is a guy who is perfectly designed for the style of pressing that they play. He is incredibly good at reading when to press, when not to. And his injury, I think, made them shift a lot of other people and pieces around. To me, Stroud was always a guy who I think they would have liked to use at a 65-minute sub type guy. Bring him in towards the end of the game. You need a goal. You need energy. He's going to come in and play that style of high press, high tempo, in your face aggression. I don't think they would have ever predicted that he would have started as much as he did. And I think that was more based on just having injuries at certain positions and having to move people around. And so, yeah, I certainly understand why, Stroud could be your pick, because he did contribute a lot last year.
Yeah. Well, the players are in, some players are out. Seems relatively set on where we're going with the team. Who is the player to watch that is going to have a big year this year? Not necessarily going to be the best player who's going to put up the best numbers, maybe like a Klaus or a Leuven, but who's that guy who people might not know to look for throughout the season that you think might be the next guy to take the big step up?
Well, to me, and this kind of dovetails from the Stroud conversation, it's the guy who's probably going to get most of the minutes that Stroud is now leaving behind as he goes to DC, which is Celio Pompeo. Celio is a guy who, when the season started last year, I was not overly enthralled with. I thought his style of ball possession and trying to beat people off the dribble and slowing it down. I was like, I don't know if that fits with their kind of direct approach of get the ball up the field, get a lot of quantity of shots, move everything, do it quickly. And he didn't seem to mesh very well early on in the limited time that he was playing with their style. And they actually had sent him to City 2, which is their next pro team, to get him minutes down there because he wasn't seeing a lot with the senior club. And so when he came back, he was a much different player. And he wasn't different in the style that he plays. To me, it was different in how quickly he was doing the things that he does. So rather than, slow down completely and try and beat two guys off the dribble, it was, hey, either make a decision. Either I can beat him off the dribble or I'm going to make a pass. It was just speeding up everything. And when it came to the end of the season, and he was, getting more minutes, he was, for any objective fan or a neutral, he was the most dangerous player that we had in the two playoff games by far. Like when he came in the second game, he was clearly someone that Kansas was fearful of, and you could tell they shifted their defense because in the first game he was all over the place. In the second game he was creating chances everywhere. And so Celio is a guy who is going to get a lot of minutes this year. I think they are reliant on him, and saying, hey, this has to be a guy who steps up and helps provide offense because they did not go out and get an immediate replacement for Joe Aquini. They didn't go get another striker. They might see how things go during the first half of the season, and then they have the summer transfer window. They still have a DP slot open. They're going to hopefully have another 2 international slots, as Leuven and Joachim Nielsen are right now getting their green cards. So that's going to open up some international slots, hopefully. And so Celio is a guy who I think can seize that opportunity. And, he has grown by leaps and bounds. He was not the same player when he came back than he was early in the season, when he came back from City 2. And I think the expectation for him is, yeah, he can play on the wing. You might even be able to slide him up top occasionally if they need help up there. And I think that's the guy that if you don't know who he is, I think a lot of fans who are neutrals are going to know who he is by the end of this year. There's some other guys you could throw out there like Nuffy Thorson and players like that, but I think Celio is probably my pick for the guy to come out of nowhere to make an impact. So,
Well, Connor, I usually throw it to you, but I kind of have to jump in on this because uh, my name just dropped right at the very end of Chris's statement there. I've picked Nokvi Thorson. Uh, I think 9 games in 260 minutes, we didn't see a lot of what he was going to do. Um, Stroud's gone. You're going to have a ton of games, right? We talked about the amount. And I think that you're going to see a ton of rotation at those wide spots. And it's just about who hits. And I, I've heard throughout the Twitter sphere and things like that Nokvi's a guy to watch. He's going to surprise a lot of people, whether that be as an out and out starter every day, all day, or as a rotation piece or off the bench. Just somebody to keep an eye on. So that's why I went with him. But curious to know if they transfer market is not to be trusted all the time, but they do have them listed on the same side.
yeah.
So do they split? Will they both end up on the same side? Are they fighting for minutes there?
Well, Thorson's an interesting guy because they brought him in. He's the Icelandic national. They brought him in midsummer last year. Mid-season over the summertime, and Lutz Van Steel said from day one, we are bringing him in at this point, not with an expectation that he's going to be a major contributor the rest of this year in 2023. We are bringing him in now because we wanted him and we had our eye on him, but we want him to take the last half of the season to adjust to a new country, to a new league, to the speed of play, to just all the stuff you have to adapt to as a new player. One of the things that was talked about quite a bit last year, and spoken about for the success that City had, was the fact that the year before they brought a lot of their players in to play for City too in Next Pro, and so you had guys like Leuven and Klaus and some of these guys who came over, basically the year before they started, who had already gotten acclimated to living in the United States. Where do I go to eat? Where do I live? What how do they play over here? What's the weather like? All that stuff. And so I think when Lutz basically talked about his signing of Thorson, it was, hey, we're going to give him the rest of this half of the year. We'll try to get in some minutes here or there. He did have a goal, and did play in 9 games. But I think it was more of, this is a guy we're getting for next year, right? And so he's a guy that the flexibility to play as a winger or play up top. He can play striker when you need him to. That was my 1A, 1B choice. It was going to be Celio or Thor. And so that's a guy that for sure I understand why you picked him, because it's something where I think they're going to ride the hot hand when it comes to that. I think it's going to be, hey, is who's playing well, who's in form, and hopefully they can get enough minutes between both of them to get in a rhythm, and it's tough sometimes when you're a guy who only maybe sees 10 or 15 minutes at the end of every game to really get a rhythm of playing. And so I think you'll see both of them start. I think you'll see both of them start early on. And I think they'll develop over the season and figure out, okay, if Celio's playing on wing, do we, what do we do with Thor, and vice versa? They're both going to play a lot. So yeah, I can certainly understand why you picked him.
Nice. Awesome. Connor, your thoughts?
I'm going to go down a different route.
Ooh.
I will avoid the left winger because I think we've run every left winger option so far. I am going to go with Sam Adeniran. So I definitely understand that Klaus he's striker number 1 going into the season, and as it should be. Considering how much time he missed last season with injury, I think Adeniran could have a decent amount of game time. And even if Klaus does stay healthy, considering how many competitions they're in, I think he could still get a decent amount of game time. And in the limited game time that he got last season, you mentioned he was out alone at the start. When he came back, as you mentioned also, he was really good. He had 8 goals in less than 1,000 minutes played. He led the team in goals per 90 minutes, and he did it on 3.9 XG. So he was scoring way more goals than I guess was expected from him. Obviously, XG is somewhat of a judgmental stat, but it seemed like he was performing really well. And while I, again, don't think that he's necessarily the starter, considering that Gio is gone now, I think that could open the door for more minutes for him. And, obviously not hoping that anything happens to Klaus, but if he did get injured again, I think Adeniran's the guy that steps up and is the guy for St. Louis. And based on what he was able to do last season, I can't see any reason why he wouldn't be able to continue that level of production and expand on it even more with more minutes.
For sure. I think you'll see a little bit more flexibility this year in the formations they're going to play. I think you will see more 4-2-3-1, honestly, than you did last year because of Joe Keeney being gone. So I think you will see you'll see them play together for sure. In fact, the preseason game today, they started together. You're going to see Klaus and Adeniran together a lot. But are there going to be games where like, hey, we need to give one of them a break? Let's play one up top and then bring the other one in as a late sub. You're going to see that a lot, right? You're going to see that kind of handling of minutes. And it ties back into the fact that, again, they kind of ran themselves in the ground towards the end of last year. And I think they are going to hopefully learn from that and realize, hey, you don't have to win your conference to win the cup. The two teams that played in the MLS Cup final were 3 seeds, right? You don't have to kill yourself to win the conference. And so managing minutes, I think, is going to be a big thing, especially with you throwing that extra competition that they have this year now. With the Triple C coming up, starts in a couple weeks, and so you're going to see a lot of both of them. Adeniran is also an interesting name because there was a little bit of rumblings towards the end of last year that there may be some European teams looking at him. And he fits the mold of a incredibly fast, tall striker who can score goals. That's always going to pique people's interest. The rumors obviously float around that the two guys from City who could potentially be targets to move are him and Aziel Jackson. I would frankly I wouldn't be surprised at all if AZ is a guy who gets moved in the summertime. I think there's a lot of interest from a lot of teams, and there was a lot of teams here scouting him last year. The fact that he just had a camp with the U.S. national team is also kind of elevated his profile. And so I think they want to get as much as they can out of Sam for as long as they're going to have him. In fact, he was the only guy, it was interesting last year during the exit interviews, who everybody else had kind of talked about, hey, can't wait for next year. And I'm so excited for next year. He was the only guy that almost spoke in a past tense. And it was almost like he was maybe expecting, maybe there is a good chance I might get moved or go somewhere in Europe. Sam's a guy that they're going to definitely need to rely on and lean on for sure. So.
All right. The last little bit here, and it's the biggest part of this, so no pressure. You're going into season 2. You've got all the information at your hands. What's the biggest question you're watching this season? So what's the biggest storyline or the biggest question you have right now as the season is almost upon us?
Did they learn from last year? I think it's not a question of any individual player. It's not a question of the style of play that they have, or is the organization doing anything right or wrong? I mean, the organization, the club, the ownership is, checking all the boxes. They're doing a phenomenal job. It's did they learn from last year, and how do they apply that knowledge towards this year? It's things like, you had Roman Berkey play 32 out of the 34 MLS regular season games last year. That's too many games. Like, it's just flat out, it's too many games when you also consider that he was playing in Leagues Cup and things like that. So, and even Berkey talked about 3/4 of the way through the season how tired he was, and like how draining it is to not only play that many games, but also in the weather that we have here, especially in the summertime. It's rough. And so, are they going to? I think they got caught up a little bit last year in record chasing. Andrew, you talked about at the very top, like it was one of the greatest expansion seasons ever. They were essentially 1 win away from breaking the all-time expansion points record. And I think they were chasing that a little too hard. I think they maybe wanted to make that as the greatest season ever for an expansion club. And I don't think they had anything in the tank left. And I think they have to apply that knowledge to say, look, there has to be another level you can go up to when playoff time comes around. Like, there just has to be. You can't burn it all out in the regular season. So, to me, that's the biggest question: is how do they take what they learned last year as far as managing minutes, managing competitions, keeping guys fresh, don't burn anybody out, keep legs fresh. And a lot has been made of, oh, if you're going to play Red Bull style, or you're going to play energy drink soccer, or whatever you want to call it, you're going to press. then that's not going to work because you're going to kill yourself and you're going to, you won't have anything left at the end of the year. And Carnell has directly addressed this and said, hey, there's going to be some things what we do differently this year and styles of play that even during games that we might change it up a little bit to try to manage some of that stuff. And so I think, the biggest question is, what do they apply in year 2 from what they learned in year 1? So.
And I think the benefit of St. Louis right now is that you've got the players that can play a second style, right? When Carnell was at Red Bull, and Red Bull for the last 4 years has been one way and one way only. We're going to press and we're going to win the ball high and we're going to create chances. And if we don't, well, say goodbye to 3 points, right? And then when you try to change, right, Chris Armas in 2018, all the way down through Gerhard Struber and even Troy Lesesne this last season, you try to change, you don't have the types of players that allow you to change. All you've brought in are grinders and players who are going to get in stuck in tackles and work their butt off. And then the second you ask them to be technical, it's over. I think St. Louis is in a different position where if you ask players like Edward Leuven to be technical, you will have success. Yeah, ask João Klaus to combine with Edward Leuven and play in, you will have success. Like, you're built in a much better way where you can have a second system, which I think is exciting for you guys.
Yeah, if you think about, like we talked about earlier with the acquisitions and things, they at the end of the year they looked at what are the weak spots, what do we need to improve on from year 1. So they go out and they get a Durkin, they go out and get two new wing backs. So clearly they're looking at what is City lacking, and how do we address it? And Carnell's already spoken about, okay, the criticism of us last year was we can't beat a low block. We can't, if another team forces us to possess the ball and try to break them down, we weren't very good in doing that. Well, if they've already identified that that's one of the things, and the other 3 things that they identified they've taken care of and said, here's what we're going to do to fix that, then I have full confidence in Carnell and his staff and Lutz and those guys to say, okay, if that's going to be how teams want to play against us, then clearly we're not just going to keep banging our head against the wall doing what we did last year. We're going to have to adapt and change. And I think the players they brought in gives them flexibility to do that. And so, yeah, I think you're still going to see him press. You're going to still see him play that high, attacking style. But I think having a full season of saying, okay, here's how teams are going to try and stop us. Now we have to come up with ways to beat that. I think they're going to be better suited to do that than they were kind of having to do it midstream last year. So,
Connor, your question.
I do, just before I jump into my question, one thing I did want to comment on that is, since Andrew and I are covering like all the teams in the league, it's really odd how many teams are like 6, 7, 8 players deep in one position, and yet there's like still adding players in that position. It's like, wow, that's great. You added your 8th center mid on the team, but you have 1 center back left on your team. It's like, what are you going to do to address that? But St. Louis is a team where it's like, all right, these are the holes in the team. We're going to address this immediately. And it's like, all right, we know we're okay in these other positions. We don't need to go out and go get another Edward Leuven, another João Klaus. Like, we're good there. Let's look at the fullbacks where we feel like we're a little weak. We were playing guys out of position and they address it immediately. I think that's the way front offices should look out of the offseason. And I think they've done a really great job at it.
Connor, call them out. Call the baseball players out. Do it.
Oh, no, I was thinking Minnesota, not the baseball players.
New York City's got 9 wingers and 3 center backs.
Yeah, I mean, they're could unveil a formation that's never seen before, or probably ever after that. But it's interesting to see how some of these teams are name chasing or chasing just, hey, this guy's really good, let's get him. And okay, well, does he fit? I mean, you can clearly tell that the way that Lutz is building this team is the first question they ask is, does he fit our style? And then probably the second question, and he's even said this in press conferences, does he fit our style, and does he fit playing in St. Louis? This isn't LA, this isn't New York, this isn't Miami. It's not a flashy place. It's not a destination for European players who are, guys who are older who want to live in these exotic areas. It's the Midwest, right? You're going to have a harder time convincing a high level, older European player to come play here than you would, go to LA or New York or somewhere flashy. But again, like we talked about, that's not the style of players they're looking for anyways. They're looking for younger guys who are trying to prove themselves, who can run, who are athletic. And yeah, it's interesting to see how they're doing it compared to some of the other teams, especially this offseason. St. Louis seems very focused on, we identify the problems, let's fix them, and not just throw money wildly and try to assemble, the best number of players we have. And who cares if they all play the same position? Like, that's not how they're doing things.
All right, I can jump into my question now. So I feel like as a neutral, I think a lot of people are going to have the same question, and I tried to avoid that because I think, and Andrew and I were both guilty. We had very low expectations for St. Louis going into last season, and they definitely outshined that. And I think a lot of neutrals are going to be asking the question of, was last season a fluke? And like, can they do it again? I'm going to avoid that question because I think I just think it's too easy of a question. But you actually already answered my question, but I'll still ask it anyway.
Sorry.
No, it's okay. It's all good. But we've seen with a lot of expansion teams that there's a ton of hype coming into the first season. People are super excited. They're selling out stadiums. My question was going to be, can St. Louis sustain this hype around the team, continue to sell out their stadium every single game? But you said it earlier. You seem pretty confident that they'll be able to continue this going into this season too.
The talk. So, there's a lot of debate and back and forth, and I won't bore people to death with the whole, soccer capital of the country thing, whatever. It's kind of played out at this point. But this is one of the historic soccer cities in this country. There is no denying that. It has always been a major part of culture here. Mostly because of the ethnic populations, like I talked about at the very beginning. We have a huge Italian area, and that was a big part of, the famous the 1950 World Cup team that was the Boys from the Hill, which is the Italian, historic Italian area of St. Louis. And, this city has produced an awful lot of very high level soccer players. In fact, St. Louis's own Josh Sargent had a goal today in the EPL. So, it's a city that loves the game, period. And yes, you are going to see, at least for the near future, packed houses every time at City Park, crazy fans, and which is good and bad. Part of the bad is that it does, tend to mean that ticket prices are very high on the secondary market. And so that's a little tough for some people because, you want to go, but it's also expensive if you're not lucky enough to be a season ticket holder, which those of us who are lucky feel very lucky to have been picked. They sold 18,000 roughly season tickets last year, and they had a waiting list of 65,000. And the waiting list is now over 100,000. The talk has already started about can or should they expand City Park. They built it with the design idea that they could add about another 3,500 seats or 3,000 seats in the upper corners. So that kind of conversation has already started. Like, hey, should they just go ahead and toss another 3K seats in there and bump the capacity up from 22.5 to 25.5? And so, it's the hype around this team in the city is always going to be that way. It's a soccer mad place, and it's going to be a place that, much like other sports, that players are going to fall in love with playing here. And I think the hype that's around the team, maybe not nationally. And like you said, the question of was it a fluke? That's an easy question. Like I said, who knows if it was? They're gonna have to prove it on the pitch just like anybody else. But the atmosphere around the club, and around the stadium and around the organization itself is going to be, going to be bigger and better, I think, even than it was this past year. So the city is fallen in love with this club. And the fact that we have an ownership group that is local, Carolyn Kendall, who's the primary owner, first of all, the only female-led ownership group in MLS. Also, she's part of the Taylor family, the Enterprise Rent-A-Car people. So that's one of the first families in St. Louis. They're one of the biggest families in St. Louis. So it's a local group of owners, along with Jim Kavanaugh, Worldwide Technology, who's been a big soccer supporter here for years. So it's St. Louis people who are doing things to build not only the club on the pitch, but also they're building soccer pitches all over the community, all over the area. They're, doing things to ingrain themselves into the community and not just be a sports team. They're being part of the rebuilding of the downtown west area where City Park is, and they're helping to kind of revitalize the city. So yeah, the hype's gonna exceed, I think, even what last year was.
That's so cool to see. We talk all the time about uh, kind of what Connor was alluding to, the drop off, right? And every team experiences it to a degree, but
Mhm.
it's how fast it happens, and the fact that you guys are exceeding it is great to see. I mean, my question was what y'all alluded to is, what does year two look like? Are they learning from it? Was it good? Was it good form? A bit of luck? The joke goes around that y'all were paying every defender in the league to pass it to
Make
the
back
players
passes.
right in
Yeah.
front of.
Yeah, I mean, we'll take those all day.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, no
And
complaints
I'm
there.
sure any team would. The thing that always kind of confused me a little bit or just baffled me was, you heard, oh well, Austin struggled in like their second or third year, and so clearly that's going to happen here. That's going to happen to City. Well, why? I mean, that doesn't have to. And again, and I'm sure we're going to finish up and talk about kind of projections for where we think they're going to finish. But, so to me, they can have a better record, or sorry, they can have a better year with a worse record. They could have a better year this year than they did and have less points than they did last year, because it's about the growth of the club and it's about the style of play and developing the players, and having success. I think more focused on, okay, we have to be more in mind that this is a league that has playoffs, and in this league, playoffs matters and the cup matters. And so this isn't just about the regular season. So yeah, I think, yeah, there's obviously the questions on, can they have the success they had last year? But to me, it's not necessarily, are they going to go out and win the West again? That's not, to me, the right question to ask. So.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the predictions. Let's finish up with some predictions. Where do you think St. Louis finishes?
It's tough, because there's a lot of Western teams that you don't really know what they're going to be. I mean, Colorado's made some, a lot of what you would think would be improvements to their club. I'm hopefully also they fix their scoreboard. You'll have to ask whoever you're getting from Colorado if that's getting taken care of. But, I know that's been a problem for them for a while. So there's been a lot of movement of players in the West, and in the league, obviously, as a whole. But, so it's going to be hard to know really what some of these teams are, and you're not going to know what they are for probably several months. You can't just slap a bunch of guys together on a roster and be like, okay, now you're all familiar with playing each other. It takes time. You have to build these relationships on the field, and that's what training is for. But it's also, it's going to take a while. And we benefited from being able to do that a year before in Next Pro than we started last year. So as far as where I think, I've seen some people, especially at the national level, and people I won't bring up here that we all kind of know who they are, have questioned, is this even a playoff team? Are they going to make the playoffs at all? Are they going to struggle to fight for a playoff spot? Uh, I mean, to me, that's a silly question to ask. I think, it would be shocking to me if this is not a very competitive team in the West. Do I think they're gonna be first in the West? Yeah, we'd love to see it. I don't necessarily think is gonna happen. And I also think that based on last year, they may not care if they finish first in the West, right? To me, this is probably as constructed. Now, again, not talking about health, not talking about any potential summer moves, which they have set themselves up, and that's the thing. And like I talked about before, they have set themselves up to have a ton of flexibility this summer if they need it. With the international slots coming open, still having a DP slot open, like they have as much flexibility as any team in the league come summertime. So if they need to make a move, they're able to. To me, as constructed, would I be happy, totally unhappy if they finish fourth or fifth? No, I think that's a fairly reasonable expectation for the group of players that they have and the team that they have. And to me, it's like, yeah, could they finish anywhere from 3 to 6? That would be more my expectation, is top half. top four, hosting a playoff series, I think is a reasonable expectation. So I figured probably fourth if I was going to have to put, a specific number on it. That's kind of where I maybe would project them.
Yeah, I'm gonna just jump in here because I'm right about there too. I don't think it's a crazy thing to say that they overperformed expectations last year, but when you talk about a regression to the mean or where they're supposed to be, I don't think that drops them out of like the top six. Like a regression to the mean for this team with the way the roster is built is not going from first in the West to 13th in the West because they're an expansion team, right? This team, the way it's built and the way they're coached and the way their system works, to me, regressing back is 3 to 6, anywhere between 3 and 6. I think a home playoff series is absolutely in the cards. I think there are, like you mentioned, other teams that have done very, very well and could jump them and push them into maybe a 5-6 spot. I think a play-in game in the 8-9 role is an underachievement for the group. So I'm right on board with you there. Connor, you got an idea? What are you thinking?
Well, I'm thinking this is the top team in the West from last season. And yes, I do think, like you said, I think they overdid expectations from last year, but it's the top team in the West, a team that only improved in the offseason. I know they lost Gio, but they addressed the holes in their team. And I can't see any reason why they wouldn't compete again towards the top of the West. I think the West is pretty open. I think the East is tougher than the West. Um, I think there's a couple of really good teams in the West, like Seattle, that would make it a little bit tougher to be number one. But I think they could be anywhere between 2 and 4. I think they get a home playoff game again. I think they're challenging up towards the top of the West again. They have a system. They know how to play it. They play it well. They play well together. And I think they bolstered their team, made themselves even stronger for this upcoming year. I think maybe the only thing that drops them a little bit lower for me is just the added level of competition, adding in Champions Cup as well. I think could maybe make things a little bit tougher for them in terms of fatigue by the end of the season, but we'll see how long they end up staying in Champions Cup. So, if it's an early exit, then obviously it doesn't have too much of an effect on them. But yeah, I still think they're one of the better teams in the West. So I see them 2 through 4.
Yeah, I think that's totally fair. I think that's right about where we can call this predicted, previewed, and not so deep dive. Chris, thanks so much for jumping on with us. Your insight was everything we could imagine and more. I know you were talking a little bit how you weren't going to bore us with the whole history of soccer capital. We're history nerds, so I ate that up. I know Connor ate that up, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners did too. Thank you so
I
much.
didn't want to bring that up and immediately have everybody turn you off. So, because yeah, any other city, they, that tends to grate people. We have also, another moniker for Cardinals fans here that everyone else in the country hates, and despises the whole best fans in baseball thing. So yeah, I didn't want to have anybody just click the stop play button when they heard that. So I just wanted to say personally, it was a blast talking to you guys. I appreciate everything you guys do. The perspectives you guys have as outside looking in is always great. I think there's only so much of the homer perspective you can get, and it just kind of blends together. I'm a big supporter through the website of we have 19 city podcasts in St. Louis right now. Yes, 19, and that's fan made. That's on top of a couple that the radio stations do, and the city CSC actually has an official one. So it's great to get outside perspective on what other people think about your team. And I think this is a great thing that you guys are doing by having this breakdown and getting people to talk about their clubs and also providing your own input. So yeah, I'll be watching, and I'm glad to have been part of it. So
Yeah, we appreciate it. That's the whole reason we do this, because we've done it before where we're just saying what we think, but it's based off of stats and numbers and stuff, not from the inside. And that's the whole reason we want to do this. So we really appreciate you coming on and being a part of what we're doing here. We do like to give you about minute and a half to share your links and tell people where to find you if they're not finding you already. So go on and let them know.
Yeah, so what I do is I run a website called STLSoccerNews.com. Really what it was designed to do initially was when City SC season started last year, it was basically created to just throw a bunch of links up for people's podcasts in St. Louis. And because like I said, we have a lot of podcasts, a lot of YouTube, a lot of writers, a lot of people who create content. And I was having trouble myself finding it. And I just said, hey, let me just start something that, where I can kind of collate that stuff. And as soon as people found out I was doing it, it turned into, well, if you're going to cover this, why don't you cover all the local, college programs in St. Louis? And why don't you have stuff for high schools? And why don't you cover this and that? And it just kind of snowballed. And so yeah, so that's what the website really is. And I've helped, I've expanded it to include podcasts like your guys's that are MLS, and then other ones. We have a couple here in St. Louis that are not MLS focused, where they're talking about European leagues, or they're covering, the women's game, or, so it's more of a website to provide links to other people. I don't write articles. I occasionally, when people are nice enough to ask me to do a podcast, I'm happy to do it. But it's not about me. It's about trying to get eyes on content for the people who are actually doing the work of creating it, like you guys. And so, I'm happy to always put the focus on the people who are actually doing the work. It takes 10 seconds for me to create a link on a website to somebody else's stuff, right? And I'm happy to do it. The other people, the content creators like you guys, the guys who are making YouTube videos and podcasts and all that stuff, that's the people who need to have the focus on them, right? And so it's never been about me. It's more of just, hey, can I help these guys out who I enjoy watching and I enjoy listening to? And so that's really what the website's designed to do, and to bring together the soccer community here in St. Louis and provide them easy information is really what it's designed to do. So
Well, and that's such a big thing that we of course appreciate, but other people might not appreciate as much because mainstream media doesn't cover our sport as much as they should, right? And I think that most people know that. You look at ESPN, soccer's a blip in the corner, right? So I think we were talking to Tom Bogert back in December, and he made the same comment where it's the fan run stuff, the independent stuff that pushes the game out way farther.
yeah.
So what you're doing is fantastic. Obviously, we appreciate it, but for the game in general, so we appreciate you. So that's STLSoccerNews.com. Go check that out if you want to find any podcast links, anything that you're interested in, soccer wise, is all linked through there. I actually did check it out the other day, and it is an extensive list, way more than it apparently originally was meant to be. So
Yeah, it started as a just a pet hobby project, and turned into a pretty big snowball going downhill pretty quickly, because I would get a lot of feedback from the podcasters here in town, and other people saying, well, it's all kinds of stuff on there, and we talk, we have breakdowns of things for match day, and where do you go if you're coming into town and you've never been to a city match, where do people hang out, like all the way down to things like what are cities, what are the, I think we have on there the Sherwin-Williams paint colors for city. If you want to paint your
yeah,
basement city red, or one of the other colors, like what are the color codes, what are the hex codes, what are, like all that kind of stuff, where it's like, if you have trouble finding it, and because everybody has a different level of how good they are at searching for things and Googling things, and you have older fans, you have younger fans, and it was just more of, hey, let's just throw as much stuff on there, and if it helps somebody find something without having to dig for a half hour, or go on Facebook, or go on Twitter, or go somewhere else and have to ask for help. If we can just put stuff there and it helps them, great, and we're working a lot this year. I've talked to a bunch of the other, people in the community, and in the kind of content creator community this year, that we're going to start doing some things, not necessarily with me specifically, but a lot of them want to talk and get more information about the other cities. And so one of the things I'm going to do this year is kind of a know your enemy thing, where when we are getting ready to play somebody, I'll be focusing and highlighting and saying, okay, here is, if we're going to play Austin, here's some of the Austin podcasts. Here's some of the people who write about Austin. If you want to get their perspective on the game that's coming up, that's one of the things we're going to do this year on the website. And then some of the other stuff in the St. Louis content creator community that's cool is they're going to start compiling City SC Report, which is one of the websites, and they write a lot of stuff, and they have a podcast as well. Those guys are going to be doing, okay, if you're going to go to a stadium, so if you're going to go watch a game in Cincinnati, or you're going to go watch a game in Seattle, where do you go? Where do you hang out? Where's the, places to go before the match? And it just, we want to become part of the MLS community. We want to be part of this, collection of fan bases and collections of fans, because that's the one thing I think that's different about this league than a lot of the other leagues, which is, there's much more of especially at City Park, and can't speak for every stadium, but it's much more of a college football atmosphere downtown during game days than it is during NHL or baseball. In baseball, you typically go somewhere and you're there with them. If you hang out before the game with the people you're on the game with, whereas with most soccer match, most MLS matches, you're going to hanging out with a few thousand of your best friends, and then you go into the game. So, and people are always welcome from other teams, and we're very welcoming here. And so it's that kind of interaction with the other fan bases that now that we've been through this for a year, we can start to do that more. And we're really excited about that. So
That's awesome. Growing the game one step at a time. Chris, thanks again so much for jumping on with us and speaking with us. Thanks everybody for listening. We hope you enjoyed it. And we will first off, make sure you go to STLSoccerNews.com, give Chris some love, show him that you're over there. And we will see you next time on the next episode of the Designated Players podcast. See ya.